The CEO panicked as everything failed, and the janitor's daughter surprised everyone. Welcome to Tales of Conquest. Tell us where you're listening from. And prepare yourself, because this will be one of the most impactful stories you've ever seen. Nothing and no one will ever be the same after this. On the most gleaming floor of Centris Tower, the corridors smelled of lemon-scented disinfectant. Screens projected graphs no one quite understood, and branded suits walked as if they didn't touch the ground. There, where million-dollar decisions were signed with a click, where credentials weighed more than words, a girl sat every morning, right next to a broken vending machine, with a worn notebook between her knees. Her name was Lara Ramos, but in that building, no one called her by her name. No one looked at her. No one even knew she was there. She was the daughter of Elena Ramos, a woman who cleaned offices with surgical precision, who spoke little, smiled even less, and worked as if every shining piece of furniture was her only way of existing. They entered through the back door together, every day, at 6:45 a.m., before the first executive turned on their laptop, and no one noticed them. Sometimes, Lara thought maybe that was good. She always wore the same thing, an oversized gray hoodie, jeans with torn pockets, and a backpack that seemed to have survived more years than she had. Inside that backpack, she kept 3 things she never left behind: her squared notebook filled with strange diagrams, a chewed pencil, and a small circuit board she'd found in a dumpster behind a workshop. Lara didn't talk much, didn't make noise. She learned early on that if she didn't interrupt, no one would kick her out. While her mother disappeared into the service elevator, Lara sat on the same bench near the loading dock. From there, she could see a part of the development offices, screens with lines of code, giant headphones, post-it notes stuck with unintelligible formulas, and then she'd open her notebook, take out her pencil, and start to draw. But she didn't draw flowers, or houses, or cats. She drew systems, networks, logic tables, languages no one had taught her. No one had shown her how an algorithm was built. She discovered it herself, observing, stealing minutes from open screens, listening to other people's conversations, reading technical magazines from the floor. Once she heard her mother tell a colleague that Lara had something special in her head. The colleague replied that all children are intelligent, but Elena didn't insist. She just lowered her head and kept mopping. Lara didn't mind being alone. She also didn't care that no one asked her what she was doing there. She liked being near computers, imagining solutions no one asked for, solving problems that only existed in her mind. That particular morning, she was mentally redesigning how data could travel from one server to another without passing through a corrupt node, a problem that shouldn't concern a child. But Lara wasn't just any child, not in the way she looked, nor in the way her fingers caressed the pencil as if it were a surgical tool. The minutes passed as they always did, with the distant sound of heels, voices talking about meetings, screens lighting up with blue light. Everything was normal, predictable until it wasn't. At 08:07, all the lights flickered simultaneously, as if an electrical sigh had swept through the building. Screens went black, phones went silent, and the main elevator emitted a dry screech before stopping. Lara looked up. She didn't move. She didn't speak. On the other side of the glass, chaos began to brew like a silent wave. Executives dropped their cell phones. Technicians ran to servers. Assistants screamed over internal channels, screens now only showing a red line. Access denied. Larry understood what was happening, not from experience, but because she had imagined it 1,000 times. A cyber attack. One of the big ones. one that not only disables access, but internally overrides recovery protocols. And everyone, absolutely everyone, seemed as lost as if it were their first time touching a keyboard. She knew that this type of attack didn't appear out of nowhere. It wasn't accidental. It was surgical, indulgent, planned. And yet, all the adults in the room began shouting improvised solutions. One said, "Restore the backup." Another yelled, "Ping the external DNS." Someone else mentioned, "Kernel override." Big, nervous, jumbled words. Layera pulled a fresh sheet from her notebook. She wrote, "This isn't brute force. It's an internal shutdown. Someone knew exactly where to hit." And for the first time in weeks, her hand trembled slightly. Because inside, a certainty began to blossom. They didn't know what to do. She did. Within minutes, the most modern building in the tech district looked like a queenless beehive. The hallways filled with hurried footsteps. Emails stopped arriving. Servers stopped responding. And the silence preceding the catastrophe was broken by shouts, violently slammed doors, and phones thrown onto desks. But amidst all that chaos, Layra Ramos remained seated. Not because she didn't understand what was happening, but because she understood it too well. A group of men in Italian suits emerged from the boardroom. One of them, with a red tie and a trimmed beard, punched a wall while muttering through clenched teeth, "This has to be a network error. Restore the emergency cluster." Another, younger, replied with a trembling voice, "We already did. Nothing works. The DNS is in a loop. The locks are empty. It's like someone erased the trace." "And security?" asked a woman in a white leather jacket, looking at her dead tablet. "Where's the response team? They're not answering." "I think they were also blocked," someone replied from the back. Layra wrote everything down, not just what they said, but how they said it. The pauses, the glances, the words they didn't know. She didn't know all the technical terms, but she recognized one thing with absolute clarity. They were reacting blindly. They weren't thinking. They were just afraid. While everyone was shouting, Layra looked away at the main screens in the central room. They showed only one thing, a map of the internal system, with red dots expanding like an infection. The red was absolute. Nothing responded. Her mother still hadn't come down from the upper floors. She probably didn't know something was wrong. That gave her a few minutes, maybe more. But she couldn't get up. She knew what happened when she became visible. The stares, the questions, the orders, the "little girl, you shouldn't be here." Then something different happened. A young man with round glasses, thinner than the others, and without the arrogant air of the rest, came down the stairs with a folder in his hand. His badge read, "Elias Zanabria, development intern." He didn't seem nervous, but not confident either. He walked as if he knew he would be ignored, as if he was used to not being heard. He stopped in front of one of the terminals and observed the error codes. He said nothing. He just frowned and murmured, "This isn't external. This is coming from within." Layra felt a small shiver. It was the first sensible sentence anyone had said. Without thinking, without measuring, she murmured as if talking to herself, "Did you check the socket overflow loop?" The words came out so softly that they barely floated in the air. But someone heard them. "What did she say?" growled a white-haired engineer, turning his head. "Who let a child in?" Several executives turned their gaze. Some scoffed. Others laughed. One even said aloud, "For God's sake, are we going to take advice from the cleaning lady's daughter now?" Layra felt the heat rise to her face. She regretted it instantly. She was going to put away her notebook to disappear. But she didn't, because amidst all those stares, there was one that didn't judge her. "Elias Zanabria." He said nothing. He just kept looking at her and didn't look away. Lara returned to her sheet. She began to write as if it were her only defense. If the attack comes from within, it's a phantom protocol. They are looking in the wrong place. No one is tracking the loops. There is no real diagnosis, only panic. And then she saw it. On one of the secondary screens, someone was trying to restart the system. Error. Another forced it with common commands. Blocked. Lara took a deep breath. If they didn't know how to start, she did. But she had no access. She had no keyboard. She had no permission. And yet, at that moment, the entire system stopped resisting, and it began to collapse completely. The alarms started to sound. They weren't loud or fire alarms. They were more dangerous, silent, intermittent, the ones that indicate internal structural failures. The source code was corrupted. The electronic doors reset themselves. Security cameras showed interference. It was there, in the midst of the collapse, that Elias approached her. "Do you understand what's happening?" Lara didn't answer, but she raised her notebook and showed him a page, a diagram, alternate routes, manual diagnostic loops. Elias looked at it. He didn't laugh. He didn't hesitate. He just murmured, "That makes more sense than everything they've said in the last hour." He turned. He walked to the control room. He raised his voice for the first time. "We need a free terminal and a standard keyboard. Now." "What for?" shouted one. "Because we have someone who sees what no one else is seeing," Elias replied. The silence was immediate, and when everyone turned to see who he was referring to, Lara didn't lower her gaze. For the first time, someone had pointed her out not to expel her, but to listen to her. The keyboard was too big for her hands. It was installed on an ergonomically designed desk in front of 3 curved screens that until minutes before had been manipulated by a certified engineer with 3 master's degrees and an ego the size of the building. Now that man watched from a corner, arms crossed, unable to process how a girl in a worn hoodie and a recycled paper notebook occupied his place. Lara didn't ask for permission. She didn't need it. Elias had only told her one word before helping her onto the swivel chair: trust. That was enough. She placed her notebook aside, but didn't open it. She knew what she needed wasn't there. It was in her head, in the mental connections she had been building for weeks, without knowing that one day they could save more than her thoughts. The screen still showed errors, broken paths, unreturned pings, corrupted files. The engineers looked at her with a mixture of contempt and curiosity. Some muttered among themselves, "This is crazy. She doesn't even know how to read a protocol. She's going to break more than what's already broken." But Lara ignored everything. She rested her fingers on the keys without pressing them yet. She closed her eyes for a second. Then she began. Sudo access shell, level 3. Error. Sudo admin access. Manual, blink to manual recovery. Layer 1. Bypass. Protocol. Access denied. And then, silence. A new line appeared. Shell. Open. Elias, who was standing behind her, held his breath. One of the cybersecurity chiefs exclaimed, "That's not possible without the CEO's encryption." Lara didn't stop. She wasn't improvising. She was remembering. She remembered how, weeks ago, she had accessed a similar system on an old simulator she found in an abandoned forum. She had played with broken codes, damaged structures, and had discovered a behavior pattern that didn't respond to brute force, but to structural recognition. And now that same pattern was here. She typed quickly, not with anxiety, with direction. Her fingers danced as if they knew every obstacle before it appeared. The engineers approached. Some recorded with their cell phones, incredulous. One murmured, Is she accessing the kernel? Another replied in a low voice, It's not possible. That's shielded. But the screen didn't lie. Access levels changed. Routes were restored. And most unsettling, there were no alarms. No security protocol was triggered. Because Lara wasn't forcing doors. She opened them as if she knew the key. Meanwhile, on the upper floor, Martin Ball, CEO of Sentries Corporation, looked at the reports on his tablet, understanding nothing. "Who's at the terminal?" he asked through clenched teeth. His assistant, pale as a ghost, replied, "The daughter of one of the cleaning staff, sir." "No, I don't know how, but she seems to be restoring functions." Martin said not a word. He placed the device on the table. He stood up, shoulders tense, and he went down. He went down. Without announcing himself, without warning, without guards. No one saw him arrive, only Lara, who felt him. The weight of his presence, the silence that forms when someone with absolute power enters a room without raising their voice. He stopped behind her. He didn't say her name. He didn't ask what she was doing. He just watched her. She continued typing commands. 4 track errors. Loop scan, subsystem, route a new window. It opened. 3 lines. Then Hodai. The system began to respond. Martin frowned. "What are you doing?" he finally asked in a low voice. Lara didn't turn around. She just replied, "I'm reading what you didn't know how to write." There was a second of total silence, and then someone laughed, nervously. Another murmured, "Incredible." Elias stepped forward. "Mr. Vale," she was the only one who didn't lose her head. The CEO looked at him coldly. Then he turned his attention back to the screen. "What's your name?" Lara Ramos," she said, without hesitation. "How old are you?" "Old enough to know your firewalls have cracks." She replied without looking up. Some held their breath. Elias smiled silently. Martin Vale crossed his arms. "And why do you think you can fix what 100 engineers couldn't?" Lara finally looked up. "Because I'm not trying to fix it. I'm understanding why it failed." The CEO didn't answer, but something in his expression changed. For the first time, he no longer saw a child. He saw a problem he didn't understand. And that was what terrified him most. Lara didn't know how or when, but the atmosphere around her had changed. She was no longer just a child in an invisible corner. Now she was the exact center from which all the building's hope originated. What began as a mocking gaze had turned into a line of silences. Even those who had laughed before now watched her every move with a mixture of fear, respect, and guilt. Elias remained behind her, like a shield. He didn't speak, but his presence was enough to prevent anyone from daring to interrupt. Lara adjusted the monitor height with her fingertips. The system not only responded, it began to show fragments of the attack. But there was something strange. The infiltrated commands were not aggressive. They were not destructive. There was no trace of explosive malware. What she saw was elegant, almost surgical, as if someone didn't want to destroy the system, but rather hide within it. Her mind began to race faster than she could type. This wasn't common sabotage, she thought. It's a nested structure, designed to trick protocols. A way to simulate errors and redirect searches so they never find the source. She typed quickly. Access logs, deep trace, user mimic pattern. In seconds, a sequence appeared that she recognized instantly. Not because someone had taught her, but because she herself had experienced something similar in an abandoned simulator months ago, when she was exploring old code in a neighborhood internet cafe. It was a digital signature, fragments of a logic she vaguely remembered, like a message in a language she was just beginning to understand. And then, A whisper crossed her mind. It's not about breaking. It's about becoming the door. It was the same phrase she had read in that forgotten forum, where someone had shared a similar structure. Lara had copied it by hand, line by line, without fully understanding what it meant. Now, she understood. The attacker hadn't entered the system. They had become into it. The screens flickered. A new window opened, and an unexpected access to the central locks was exposed. Lara took advantage of it without hesitation. She jumped from route to route. She avoided redirection traps. She deciphered a pattern hidden among empty functions. She was following the trail of someone who wrote like her, thought like her. But with an essential difference. That person had used their ability to sow fear, to destabilize, to punish. Lara swallowed. What if she, who had learned alone, in silence, without guidance, took a similar path? What if she hadn't met Elias? What if no one had listened to her? Her breathing slowed. Elias noticed the change. He leaned towards her and asked softly, "Everything okay?" She didn't answer immediately. She continued navigating between layers of encryption. In one of them, she found an anomaly so precise that it seemed deliberate. Lara narrowed her eyes. She typed a line, "To decrypt pattern signature ID treatment menu." And there it was, a fragment of code with the same style as that old forum. Not identical, but with the same root. It wasn't coincidence. It was familiarity. Then she stopped. Not out of fear, but for something deeper. Recognition. "It's not an organization," she murmured. "It's not a group." "What?" Elias asked. She looked at him for the first time in several minutes. Her eyes were different, as if she had just found herself in a mirror, but on the other side. "It's someone like me." Elias didn't reply, but he understood everything. In the room, the executives argued among themselves. Some wanted to call the lawyers, others security. The CEO, Martin Vale, watched without blinking. And just as he was about to give a final order, one of the engineers turned to him. "Sir, I think the girl is reaching the system's core." Martin frowned. And if we don't stop her now, there will be no way to justify it if something goes wrong." "Justify what?" Martin replied, his voice icy. "That a girl without a degree did what none of you could?" Silence. No one answered. Then Lara typed again, this time with more determination. "Force access. Subshell int. Root override." True. And the system yielded. One of the monitors blinked green, then another, then a third. The air changed. Someone murmured, "Impossible." Another, "How did she do it?" And a woman with square glasses whispered, "She just recovered the entire system." But Lara didn't smile. She didn't raise her arms. She didn't celebrate. She only said one sentence, as if talking to herself. "Now I need to know who spoke to me from the other side of the code." The silence that followed the system's restoration was absolute. Not of relief, not of celebration, but of a new tension, more uncomfortable than the last, because now they could no longer pretend they knew more than she did. Lara slowly leaned back. Her hands barely trembled. Not from fatigue, but from what she had just discovered. What she had followed in the code was not a simple technical error. It was not an accidental breach. It was a conscious structure, designed by someone who understood the system better than anyone else in that building. Someone who, like her, had learned in the shadows. Behind the control room glass, Martin Vale still stood, arms crossed. He watched Lara as if trying to decipher not what she had done, but who she was. He had led that company for 15 years. He had fired geniuses, hired the best. But never, never had he felt the sense of insignificance that now overwhelmed him. A child, a cleaning lady's daughter, and she had deciphered something he himself didn't even know existed in his system. "How did she do it?" one of the engineers murmured. Elias stepped forward. "She didn't do it. She understood it." The CEO slowly turned. "And you let her sit there without permission?" Elias held his gaze. "Yes, because she was the only one who wasn't screaming without knowing what to do." Martin looked at him as if to reply, but he didn't. He turned his attention back to the screen, where Lyra was still reviewing the last commands. Then, he noticed something. An open line of code. It wasn't from the system. It was hers. A message, without a recipient. "I didn't come to fix what you broke. I came to prevent someone like me from choosing the wrong path." Martin narrowed his eyes. "What does that mean?" Lyra heard him. For the first time, she stood up from the seat. Small, thin, with her hoodie hanging from her shoulders and her notebook clutched to her chest. And she said, "I saw that code 2 years ago. It was an old simulator. I found it in a hidden forum. I studied it out of curiosity. And whoever wrote it," she continued, "didn't want to steal, didn't want to destroy, just wanted to show that they could be invisible and still control everything." The engineers looked at each other. No one spoke. "Did you recognize it?" Martin asked. Lyra nodded, lowering her voice. "Not the author, but the thought, the way of reasoning, the language." She fell silent. Then, in a thread of a voice, she added, "It was like seeing myself, if no one had listened to me." Martin felt something in his chest he couldn't name. Perhaps it was shame, or memory. At that instant, the head of security appeared with 2 guards. "Mr. Vale, shall we proceed to remove her? She's at a terminal without authorization." Lyra didn't move. She didn't back away. But Elias did. He stepped forward, interposing himself. "If you touch her, I'm leaving with her." "Excuse me?" snapped the head of security. "And me too," another voice added. It was the woman with square glasses, the same one who had been skeptical at first. "Me too," said the diagnostic loop engineer, and one by one, more voices joined in. Not with shouts, with conviction. Martin watched everything in silence. Then he raised a hand. "Put down your radios." The guards obeyed. The CEO approached Lyra. She looked him in the eyes for the first time. There was no defiance on her face, only quiet firmness. "How do you feel?" he asked. She thought for a few seconds before answering. "Tired, but not regretful." Martin nodded once. Then he turned to everyone present. "The system has been restored, but the real damage wasn't technical." No one responded. The damage was cultural, in our inability to see beyond titles, suits, and diplomas. He looked at Lyra. "Today, this company was saved by someone the system would never have let in. And that says more about us than about her." A heavy silence fell over the room. Then, the CEO took out his identification card. He extended it to Lyra. "Come tomorrow, not as a visitor, as part of the team." She looked at him with surprise. "What if I don't have credentials?" Martin smiled for the first time. "You have something worth more. Vision." Lyra took the card. She said nothing, but her fingers squeezed it tightly. For the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible. She was indispensable. The changes began the next day. Not with speeches, not with PowerPoint presentations, but with a line of code. Martin Vale entered the internal management system alone. He logged in with his personal key. He navigated through menus that even his managers didn't know existed, and he rewrote the access policies for Centris Corporation's internship program. He deleted the minimum age requirement. He removed the mandatory academic average. He crossed out the requirement for institutional recommendations, and he wrote a single line in its place. Demonstrated talent validated by diplomas. Evaluate by logic, not by resume. He didn't ask for authorization. He didn't need it. Afterwards, he called the legal team directly. He gave them clear instructions. Create a permanent scholarship fund financed by the company for young people without formal access to technological education, but with one condition, that they be discovered outside the system. What kind of candidates do you expect to find, Mr. Vale? One of the lawyers asked, confused. Martine thought of Lara, of her worn hoodie, of her drawings that looked like circuits and rivers at the same time. The ones no one is looking for? He replied. In parallel, he signed an executive order that renamed Sentries' internal digital security system. It would no longer be called Firewall Titanium or Sentries Secure. Now it had a new name, Elia Protect. No manager understood the reference, no committee voted on it, but no one dared to question it. When Elias Zanabria saw the announcement in the internal system, he couldn't help but smile. He went to the testing room, where Lara now had a complete corner adapted for her. A station with dual screens, an electronic test bench, an articulated arm lamp, and a shelf where plates, cables, resistors, and 2 tea thermoses that some anonymous assistant left her every morning were already accumulating. She didn't turn when he entered. She was focused. "Did you hear about the new firewall name?" Elias asked, his voice light. "Yes," she replied, without looking up. "I saw it this morning, and I don't like it much." Elias frowned. "Why?" Lara barely smiled. "It sounds like flattery. I didn't work for flattery. I just wanted to understand what was wrong." Elias laughed. "That won't change. But now you have a title no CEO can take from you. The one who saw what no one else saw." She looked at him. "Did you see it too?" He nodded. "Not the system. You." In the following weeks, the story began to leak outside Sentries' walls. Not as a scandal, but as a growing whisper. The system was saved by a cleaning lady's daughter. A girl with no credentials rewrote the protocols. A mind without a classroom, without permissions, but with answers. And while the news speculated, while articles tried to trace her story as if it were a myth, Lara continued, working in silence, as she always had. Every day she boarded the bus with her mother. Every afternoon she sat next to a new problem that didn't appear in any manual. Every night she kept her credential in the same small tin box where she used to keep loose screws. What had changed wasn't her. It was how they looked at her now. But Martine Val, although he had taken firm steps towards a new vision, felt something was missing. He had signed scholarships, rewritten policies, named systems, but none of that was enough, because Lara hadn't saved his system. She had saved him. He couldn't explain it exactly, but since that morning, when he saw her in front of the terminal, something inside him had broken. Or perhaps it had opened. He had remembered who he himself had once been. The child from the state home. The one who fixed broken radios behind the kitchen. The one who disappeared when the world didn't see him as useful. And now, Lara offered him the possibility of doing differently with someone what no one did with him. That's why, that very night, without announcing it, he called her directly. Not by email, not through intermediaries. He picked up the phone. He dialed the number of the apartment where they lived, and when Elena Ramos answered, her voice trembling, he only said, "Can I invite you both back tomorrow? Not as a formal gesture. Just to talk." "Really?" Elena was speechless. Then, her voice barely steady, she replied, "She'll come." Martine smiled, not with power, but with hope. Because for the first time, he was building something that would not only protect systems, it would protect futures. There was no reception. There was no protocol. There were no more escorts with tense faces, or assistants correcting last-minute papers. Only an access card on the table, with her name printed in capital letters, Lyra Ramos. No position, no title, but with full access. The elevator took her to the 42nd floor, the highest, the one for decisions rarely shared. Lyra entered the room without hesitation. She carried her notebook under her arm, her usual hoodie, though now with mended elbows, and a chewed pen between her fingers. At the head of the table sat Martin Val. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wasn't wearing a watch. He simply looked like a man, waiting to listen. "Thank you for coming," he said, breaking the silence. Lyra nodded and sat down. She didn't seem uncomfortable, nor haughty, simply present, as if that place had always been hers. "I wanted us to talk," Martin said. Not as CEO and employee. As two people who see the world in different ways, she didn't reply. She just opened her notebook, turned a few pages, and stopped at a blank one. "Can I show you something?" she asked. Martin nodded. Then Lyra began to draw. But this time it wasn't codes or circuits. It was a tree, or something that looked like one. Its branches were connections, its roots, feedback loops. On the trunk, symbols that looked like combinations of logical and emotional language. As she drew, she explained softly, "This is how I think, not in steps, not in straight lines, but in ramifications. If a system crashes, I don't look for the door that closed. I look for the roots that feed it. If there's no logic, I draw one. If there's no path, I turn." Martin didn't interrupt. He watched every line as if it were a map. Lyra continued. "Sometimes problems aren't errors. They're poorly designed structures from the start. Trying to fix them is like plugging a hole in a broken ship. What I do is understand why the ship always breaks in the same place." And she turned the notebook and showed it to him. "I didn't learn this anywhere. It's mine." Martin took it gently. He said nothing for several seconds. Then, without looking up, he asked, "How did you learn to see like this?" Lyra thought. Then she replied, "Because no one taught me another way." The silence became dense, but not uncomfortable. It was a silence of understanding. "And what do you need to keep thinking like this?" Martin asked. She didn't hesitate. "Time, space, and permission to break things." Martin smiled, not that empty smile of investors, a real one. "Break things?" "Yes. If you don't break, you don't know how it's made. And if you don't know how it's made, you can't make something better." Martin leaned back in his chair. "And if what you break is expensive? Then it will have been worth it if we learned something." Martin closed the notebook gently. "I've never met anyone who thinks like you." "I have," Lyra said, looking at him calmly. "But he chose to destroy instead of build." He instantly understood. The attacker's code, her reflection in another direction, the abyss Lyra could have fallen into, and didn't. "And why did you choose to build?" She looked at him. "Because no one told me I couldn't." Martin took a deep breath, and for the first time, he understood that it wasn't about giving Lyra opportunities. It was about her building a door for many more like her. The meeting ended without promises or photos, only with a phrase. "This place is yours, Lyra, not for you to adapt to us, but for us to learn to see like you." She stood up, took her notebook, and before leaving, left one more drawing on the table, one that no one fully understood, except him. It was a closed system, opened from within. She had no office, No institutional email, no assistant, no official title hanging on the door. But everyone knew where to find her. The left corner of the innovation lab, next to the fan that barely spun and beside the shelf of old spare parts, had become Lyra's territory. She was there every morning, with her backpack on the floor, her notebook open on the table, and her hands always busy, soldering, disassembling, rewriting. No one bothered her, but everyone watched her. At first with curiosity, then with respect, and finally with contained admiration. Because, without saying it, she became the reference, not the star, not the boss, not the figurehead. Lyra was the mind everyone wanted to understand. One Monday, a development team got stuck on a new redundant coding system. 3 days trying to figure out why the algorithm rejected specific routes. Meetings, debates, wasted hours. A nervous intern approached Larry with a sheet full of errors. "Can you look at it?" he asked. Only if you have time." She didn't answer. She took the sheet. She read it silently. Then, with her blue pen, she drew 3 lines. She crossed out 2 variables, and at the end she wrote, "You're trying to make the system think like you, instead of you thinking like it." She gave it back without a word. Hours later, the team fixed the bug. Not because of the crossed-out lines, but because of what that phrase meant. Elias noticed it. Something new was happening. Lyra, unwittingly, was building a new way of solving problems within the company, not through manuals, but through emotional logic, through structural intuition. And the others were starting to listen. One day, a senior engineer approached and said bluntly, "What she does cannot be taught, but we can learn it if we observe enough." Outside the company, the story had already exploded. The girl who saved Centris appeared in blog headlines, viral videos, even opinion columns in major newspapers. But Lyra never spoke to the press. When a journalist asked her for a quote, she only said, "I liked the problem," and left. At home, things didn't change much either. She still rode the same bus with her mother, still ate dinner with stale bread and tea, still collected broken pieces in a box she called My Futures. But now, upon entering the apartment, Elena looked at her with a different sparkle. It was no longer fear in her eyes. It was something new. Pride. And a little wonder. One Friday, Lyra was called to the boardroom. "Go!" A new team wanted her opinion on a human error prediction system in data chains. She entered. She sat down. She didn't take out her notebook. "What do you think of this?" they asked, showing her a predictive model full of graphs and colored routes. Lyra looked at it. She thought about it, and she replied, "You're trying to prevent errors before they happen, but you're forgetting the most important thing." "What thing?" "That sometimes an error isn't a failure. It's a signal, a way for the system to say it's not comfortable." Those present didn't know how to respond. That day, Martin Valle watched her from the glass corridor connecting the labs. He saw her sitting among engineers, without raising her voice, without imposing authority, simply existing with clarity. And he understood something. Lyra hadn't become part of the company. She was transforming it from the core. Not with rules, but with presence, with thought. A week later, a new group of students was invited to visit the headquarters. Many looked at everything with awe. But a little girl with braids and torn shoes stopped in front of Lyra's desk. "Are you her?" she asked. "The one who saved everything?" Lyra looked at her. She barely smiled, and replied, "I didn't save anything. I just understood what others weren't seeing." The girl looked at her in silence. Then, timidly, She took a crumpled notebook from her backpack. I draw like that too. Lyra took it. She opened it. She saw the clumsy strokes, the unconnected ideas, the shapeless dreams. Keep drawing, she said. It doesn't matter if they don't understand you now. The important thing is that you understand yourself. The girl nodded, and for the first time in her life she felt seen. Lyra didn't know it yet, but that day, unwittingly, she had lit another spark. One that would continue to grow long after Centris's lights went out. It happened on a Wednesday, without warning, without alarms, without flickering lights. A subtle fault. Small. So small that no one noticed it. Except Lyra. She was reviewing a seemingly harmless data sequence, an automated backup verification routine. But something wasn't right. A variable that repeated irregularly. A millisecond delay between calls. An echo where there should be no sound. No one else saw it. Not even Elias. But Lyra kept staring at it, like someone listening to breathing behind a closed door. The next morning, several internal modules began to behave erratically. User validations failed, access logs were overwritten, and the system began to deny permissions without an apparent pattern. Some attributed it to an overload of the testing system. Others blamed the new security patch. But Lyra didn't speak. She just drew. Martine was informed at 10:24 at Bajrayem. It's not an attack, one of the technical chiefs said. But it's not a traditional error either. We don't know what's causing it. Martine didn't answer. He just said, Lyra already saw it. She was at her station, surrounded by papers, not in front of a keyboard, not in front of a monitor, but surrounded by drawings, diagrams, twisted trees, broken lines, and a phrase written in the center. When the system no longer breaks from the outside, it begins to collapse from within. When Elias entered, she already knew why he was coming. It's not code, she said. It's structure. It's rotten at the root. Can you fix it? Lyra shook her head. I can't fix what was poorly designed from its birth, but I can reimagine it. Martine listened to her in the executive room. He had gathered 6 directors, 3 heads of engineering, and 2 external advisors. Everyone expected a technical solution, but what Lyra brought was a paper folder, and inside, a new map of the system. Not a server blueprint, not a network diagram, but an ecosystem with breathing nodes, with routes that grew like branches, with permissions not validated by hierarchy, but by contextual logic. This is not an architecture, one of the directors said. Is it organic? Lyra nodded. Because technological systems can no longer continue to function like castles, closed, controlled by keys. They must be thought of as forests, alive, capable of self-regulation, capable of learning. Are you proposing that we rebuild everything from scratch? Martine asked, in a low voice. Yes, she replied. Or it will break again, and each time it will be quieter, deeper, more irreversible. One of the engineers crossed his arms. That would destroy years of investment. Not destroy, Lyra corrected. Transplant. Elias was the first to support the proposal. I can lead the transition team, he said. But she must direct the logic, not the code. The logic. One by one, with skepticism at first and conviction afterward, the others began to align. Martine was the last to speak. And if it doesn't work? Lyra looked him straight in the eyes. Then at least we'll know that we tried something different and didn't spend another decade repeating the same formula. waiting for a miracle. Martine nodded. He closed the folder, and he said the phrase no one in that room would ever forget. Tear down the castle. We're going to plant a forest. Thus was born the Living Codex Project, a complete restructuring of Centris's central system, not based on defense, but on adaptation. Not centered on control, but on understanding. Lara did not receive a formal position. She didn't ask for one. She only asked for one thing. Let me write the first loop, the one that connects everything, the one that translates the invisible signals that no one usually listens to. That night, she stayed alone in the lab, lights low, monitor on, notebook open, and she wrote. Not perfect lines, not standard commands, but a beginning, a digital breath, a structure capable of sensing errors as part of growth. And when she finished, she looked up. She knew she was writing the future, not to shine, but so that others like her wouldn't have to knock on the door from outside. 3 months passed, and Sentries was no longer the same. The offices were quieter, but not from a lack of movement, but because now ideas flowed like rivers, not like shouted orders. The Living Codex system was not yet complete, but it was already breathing. The modules began to correct each other. Errors, instead of failures, became warnings, signals, alternative routes. There was something new in the air, an order that didn't need control. Lara never wore a badge. She never used her own desk. But everyone knew that if a doubt couldn't be resolved with formulas, if something didn't quite fit, even if it seemed logical, if a piece of data hurt, even if it didn't alert, they had to ask her. Not because she had all the answers, but because she had a unique way of listening to the right questions. One afternoon, a group of scholarship students arrived. Among them, an 11-year-old girl, dark-haired, long braids, lively eyes. She timidly entered the project room and saw her. Lara, sitting on the floor, surrounded by papers, drawing as if time didn't exist. "Are you the one who did all this?" the girl asked. Lara looked up. She smiled, without haughtiness, just recognition. "I just saw the error before everyone else." "And how did you do it?" She took a blank sheet. She handed it to her. "Draw it, your way, even if it doesn't make sense now." The girl sat beside her, and so it began. A stroke, a point, a line with no direction, but with an origin. At a high-level meeting, Martine Vale was consulted by a group of investors. Who is this girl really? What degree does she have? What position does she hold? Martine didn't hesitate. She is the core, the variable we never knew we were missing, the logic that wasn't written, the language no one taught, but that everyone began to understand. Elias, for his part, led the Codex implementation team. But every Friday, without fail, he returned to the laboratory to leave a coffee on Lara's desk. "Still not accepting the director position?" he asked with a half-smile. "Yes," she always replied, "because I already have a better one." "Which one?" "I'm proof that strange ideas work too." One day, an international visitor walked through the Centris hallways. He had heard that a young woman with no diploma had redesigned one of the country's most complex systems. He saw her from afar, sitting on the floor, drawing as always. He approached cautiously. "Are you her?" Lara looked at him. "Did you also think that only those who shout can change things?" He fell silent. She smiled. "Then stay and observe. Maybe you'll start to listen differently." At home, Elena waited for her every night with toast and hot mate. But she was no longer just the worried mother. Now she was a woman who, seeing her daughter enter, thought. Maybe the impossible just needed time and silence. The last image of Lyra that many remembered wasn't in any viral video or on a magazine cover. It was in a small, impromptu talk in the laboratory. A group of young scholarship students sat around her, and she, with an old notebook in her hand, saying, "If anyone ever tells you that you think wrong, that your logic is useless, that your way of understanding the world is mistaken, ask something simple. What if the world is also poorly designed?" The kids laughed. Some cried, and one wrote down that phrase as if it were a secret code. Because that was Lyra Ramos, not a genius, not a heroine, but a new language. One that was no longer shouted, but felt. The room was full, but the air, dense. Something had changed, not outside, but within the faces that once looked at her with admiration. Lyra entered as always, without makeup, with her worn hoodie and notebook under her arm. But this time, the chairs didn't move to make room for her. Elias gave her a warning look. "They want to make you a proposal?" She didn't answer. Martine was the first to speak, not with the kindness of before, but with the pressure of a CEO with investors breathing down his neck. "Lyra," the legal team reviewed the Living Codex protocols. "They're worried. Too much autonomy, too much flexibility. They can't guarantee total control over the modules." She frowned. And when was absolute control synonymous with intelligence? One of the directors raised his voice. "This isn't philosophy, Lyra. This is a company, with clients, audits, risks." She opened her notebook. She showed a page with the system's branching architecture. "I didn't design this to please audits. I designed it to resist errors without needing permission." Another executive pounded the table. "Then we need you to adjust it, to confine it, to set limits on it." Martine tried to soften. "We just want to make sure this remains ours." The phrase fell like lead. Lyra lowered her notebook. Her words came out like blades, but without raising her voice. "Then you understood nothing." Silence. "I didn't bring you a tool. I brought you a mirror, one that shows you've built all your security on fear disguised as structure." Elias watched, not intervening, but something in his eyes said, "Don't give in." The next day, she received a formal notification. An external committee would evaluate her system. She would have to present modifications that guaranteed total governance of the code. Lyra didn't sleep that night, not out of fear, but because she knew what that movement represented. Killing it alive. She spent the next 48 hours writing in her notebook, not codes, not defenses, but a letter, a single sheet. She delivered it in the executive room, in a sealed envelope, before the official meeting. Martine opened it in front of everyone. He read aloud, "The system I proposed cannot live confined, nor can it grow with fear. If you wish to control it, you don't need me. But if you wish to understand it, then you will have to let it breathe. I didn't come to ask permission. I came to plant something new." When he finished reading, several executives avoided her gaze. Others murmured phrases of disapproval. Lyra picked up her notebook, stood up, and before leaving said, "If you destroy this, you don't destroy my work. You destroy your future." That night, Elias caught up with her in the lab. "You could have yielded, made small changes. Sometimes you have to negotiate." "With what, Elias?" she asked. "With fear, with the real world." She closed her notebook calmly. "Then the real world will have to catch up to the one I'm building." The committee met the next day, but something unexpected happened. A leak, not of the code, but of the ideas. An intern published a summary of the logic behind the system, and in less than 24 hours, thousands of young engineers began to share it, debate it, reimagine it. Living Codex became a spark, an idea impossible to confine. Martin received a call from the board. What does this mean? He looked out the window. It means we can no longer stop it. Nor should we. Lara returned to the company not as an employee, but as the voice they could no longer ignore. Not because she raised her voice, but because others began to speak like her. In a later talk, a young intern approached her and asked, "Why didn't you do what they asked?" Lara smiled. "Because if I modified my system to please them, then it would no longer be mine. It would just be another broken mirror." 5 years passed. Centris was now unrecognizable, not by its buildings, nor by its figures, but by its way of thinking. Geniuses with dazzling diplomas were no longer hired. Minds that doubted the obvious were sought. People who thought in branches, not in ladders. The living codex system operated throughout the continent. It ran in hospitals, schools, climate systems, transportation networks. It adapted, learned, evolved. And when someone asked who had created it, no one said it aloud. They just pointed to a framed sheet. On it, the first lines of that torn notebook, the same ones Lara drew, sitting on the floor, when no one listened to her. Lara, for her part, lived in the same neighborhood. She walked every morning with her backpack and a notebook, visited schools, gave talks without cameras. She taught not theory, but ways of looking at the world without fear. "Are you famous?" a shy little girl asked her in a rural school. Lara smiled. "Only if you understand that being famous is useless if you can't sit with yourself in silence." Martin Val retired. In his last interview, he was asked what was the most difficult thing in his career. He didn't hesitate. Accepting that the best mind of our generation didn't speak like us, and learning to be silent to listen to her. In the new Centris headquarters, at the main entrance, there was no statue, no bust. There was a wooden bench, and on it, carved, "If they tell you that your way of thinking is strange, don't change it. Maybe you're seeing something no one else sees." Lara Ramos. One day, a young programmer approached Lara at an event. "How did you change everything without breaking everything?" Lara looked at him calmly. "I didn't change everything. I just planted a doubt. The rest, you did, by letting it grow." That night, Elena waited for her with hot soup. "Do you know that today a child told me he wants to be like you?" her mother said, excited. Lara sat down, tired, but at peace. "I hope he doesn't have to fight so much for that." Elena stroked her hand. "Thank you for not giving up." Lara looked at her. "Thank you for not teaching me to obey." In her notebook, there was a last page, empty. She tore it out, folded it, and left it on a bench at the entrance of a small school. A curious child found it. He unfolded it. There was only one sentence. "Don't write so they understand you. Write so they start to feel." The child didn't quite understand, but he kept it like a treasure. Years later, he would become the new development director at Centris, and in his first speech, he repeated those words, without knowing who had written them. Because that was Lara Ramos, not an employee, not a rebel, not a star, but a root, invisible, silent, but so alive that nothing grew the same again. Every day we share stories that can change you inside, and if you want to see another story where arrogance crumbles in the face of truth, watch the video. Rich woman humiliates waitress, but freezes when she sees who owns the restaurant. It's available here on the channel. Don't miss it.